On our broadcast here tonight from our NBC News Election Headquarters on Democracy Plaza, Decision Day. That means election night. Soon we get to learn the verdict of a nation. Either another term or another president after a long and bitter campaign and a grueling fight to the finish. Tonight, what we'll be looking for as those first returns start to come in. And after the storm, in the cold, without power, after losing so much they came to cast their ballots. Tonight, the extraordinary election effort to make sure everyone gets to vote while so much human suffering continues. Nightly News, this election night decision 2012 begins now.
This is NBC Nightly News with Brian Williams, reporting tonight from our election headquarters on Democracy Plaza.
And good evening from our spectacular location here tonight at Rockefeller Plaza in the center of New York City, transformed for the evening into Democracy Plaza, our NBC News Election Night headquarters. Across this country today, from the first light of day in Montana, Americans voted. They voted in temporary tents and by flashlight in the Rockaways here in New York, where, after all, an entire region remains crippled, and this will be another cold, dark night for upwards of 1 million people. The first polls have already closed. More are closing in the next 30 minutes. People are still lining up to vote tonight in the state that may, at the end, be the greatest prize of them all, Ohio. The candidates are spent after an exhausting home stretch. President Obama got off the trail in his hometown of Chicago. Governor Romney added on stops until the very end, and now it all comes down to tonight. And just after midnight, in keeping with a grand American tradition, the people of Dixville, Notch, New Hampshire, cast the first votes in the nation and voted to a 5-5 tie, the first tie vote in that small town's history, and we can only guess what that means for how late we'll be at this tonight. Our team is in place all over the country and here in New York. We want to begin with our White House correspondent, Kristen Welker, covering the president in Chicago. Kristen, good evening.
Brian, good evening to you. The Obama campaign is energized tonight, but also a bit wistful. After 4 years in office, the candidate once known for hope and change is now counting on voters to stay the course.
My name was Barack Obama, you know, the president of the United States.
President Obama campaigning tirelessly in the final hours before the polls close, stopping by a Chicago campaign office to stress the importance of turnout.
We got to round up some votes.
Since Saturday, the president has kept up a breakneck campaign pace, logging more than 7,000 miles aboard Air Force One, making a dozen stops over 8 states, and today granting about 20 interviews to local stations.
I'm really hoping that we have a big turnout in Iowa.
After a long fight, it came down to a sentimental journey to the packed center of Des Moines, Iowa, where it started for the president politically.
I've come back to Iowa one more time to ask for your vote. This is where our movement for change began.
And it didn't surprise even veteran aides when the president reached a certain portion of his emotional speech with his voice strained.
And that shows you what one voice can do.
And tears flowing down his cheek. It was the last event of his last presidential campaign.
As you know, this is a pretty emotional time for us because this is the final event of my husband's final campaign.
Today, our NBC affiliate in Des Moines asked the president about his tears.
A photographer got a little tear going down your left cheek. Was that the cold out there, or was that emotion?
You know, probably a mix of both. I have to say that being back in Des Moines, thinking about all the folks in Iowa who had worked so hard on my campaign back in 2008, and then to see them still working hard back in 2012, it made me feel deeply moved and honored to have been able to be on this journey.
Now, this final stretch has taken on the feel of a family reunion, with aides from 2008 rejoining, some growing good luck beards, others wearing good luck charms. The president's tradition, a game of basketball with some of his closest friends and advisors. In fact, we have a shot of him with one of the folks who played today, former Illinois State Treasurer Alexi Janulius, who said the president's team won by 20 points. President Obama will have dinner with his family tonight at his Chicago home before watching election returns with the rest of his team.
Like sports, politics is a superstitious business. It's going to be a long night in Chicago and elsewhere. Kristen Welker starting us off. Kristen, thanks. Now to the other side, NBC's Peter Alexander traveling with the Romney campaign. And tonight that means headquarters back home in Boston. Peter, good evening.
Brian, good evening to you. Within the last hour, Mitt Romney just landed back here in Boston after wrapping up his final campaign swing. Tonight, he's going to watch those returns alongside his wife, Ann, and all 5 of their sons. But during that last flight, he spoke to reporters and said he was very proud of the campaign, adding, and I quote, "I feel we've put it all on the field." At the end of an exhausting quest for the White House, Mitt Romney today cast his ballot alongside his wife, Ann, in their home state of Massachusetts. But his mind was on the Midwest.
Yeah, I feel good about Ohio.
Hoping to secure a win there, Governor Romney went straight from the polls to his campaign plane for a last-minute stop in Ohio with Paul Ryan, a state they've showered with attention for months.
I'm buoyed by the spirit of the people across the nation, the enthusiasm, the support, the energy. It's just amazing. Thank you.
While Mr. Romney thanked volunteers, later fueling up on fast food,
And then a Frosty.
there was a near traffic jam on the tarmac in Cleveland. Air Force Two, carrying the vice president to a late campaign swing of his own, touched down behind the Romney jet. Advisors say it was the governor himself who pushed for the day's second stop in Pennsylvania, where he appeared almost overwhelmed by the reception in a state he, until now, had largely ignored.
Oh, that's when you know you're going to win.
Why the late travel? Given the likelihood of a tight race, Mr. Romney said he didn't want to look back with anything other than satisfaction about his campaign. Last night, the Romneys were greeted by a rock star's welcome in New Hampshire. A 3-minute ovation in the state where the former Massachusetts governor kicked off this campaign more than 500 days ago.
I have a clear and unequivocal message. With the right leadership, America is going to come roaring back.
Late today, after a bitter campaign, Mr. Romney struck a conciliatory tone.
The president has run a strong campaign. I believe he's a good man and wish him well, but it's time for a new direction. It's time for a better tomorrow.
And Brian, from that conversation with reporters tonight, it is clear that Governor Romney deeply believes he is going to win tonight. So confident, apparently, that he says he has only written one speech, a victory speech.
All right, Peter Alexander, Romney headquarters in Boston, where it's also, by all accounts, going to be a long night. Let's fly across the plaza here, a location we're going to be checking in with a lot. Our political director, chief White House correspondent, Chuck Todd, the keeper of the numbers. So, Chuck, give us a viewer's guide, in effect. A lot of folks tuning in now will be with us the rest of the way out. What to look for tonight?
Well, look, good news for you presidential political junkies, because look at this. Before 9 o'clock, look at how many states in the battlegrounds where the polls will be closed. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 of the sort of 10 states we've been eyeing in either direction. The first big one comes up in a few minutes. It's the state of Virginia. And there's sort of certain things to watch in the state of Virginia. For instance, obviously we expect it to be a tight race, but if it's a good night for Romney, is it something we're able to call by, say, 9 or 10 o'clock? If it's a good night for the president, does he get it in his column early? As you know, I've done all these scenarios to 270 electoral votes. There's not many Romney scenarios that don't include the state of Virginia. And then, Brian, 2 others I want to circle here are Pennsylvania and North Carolina. These are states that Democrats believe Pennsylvania is something that's going to be in the president's column. North Carolina is something that's going to be in Romney's column. What if they're too close to call at 9 o'clock? I think in many ways it will tell you something. If Pennsylvania is too close to call, good news for Romney. If North Carolina is, good news for the president, Brian. A
board that's going to be full of green lines by the time we're done tonight. Chuck, we'll be checking in along the way. Thanks a lot. We're joined now by 3 former NBC News chief White House correspondents, Andrea Mitchell, David Gregory, Savannah Guthrie, who will all be with us the rest of the way, of course. David, same question to Chuck. What are the moments you'll be looking for tonight?
Well, I think the keys to the game here, as it were, Brian, 2 teams, and is Obama's defense better than Romney's offense? Obama's got to protect the Midwest tonight. If he can do that, those states that he won in 2008, Ohio, Iowa, Wisconsin, he gets a second term. Is Romney's offense better? Can he expand that battleground map? Get more of the states that President Bush got back in 2004. If he does that, he has his shot. And what does the vote and the voter look like? How white is it? How non-white is it? What's that gender gap like? And what about men, white men in particular, for one side or the other? We're going to be paying a lot of attention to that.
Savannah, we got to barnstorm around on Air Force One for about 24 hours last week, and what struck me is over and over, and it sounds ridiculous but true, it's not 08, and you and I were talking about this before we went on the air, in so many ways.
When you think about 2008, that was the night, of course, this country elected the first African-American president, and now 4 years later, if you look at the data, if you look at our polls, this is a country more racially divided politically than it has been ever before. The president is winning margins with non-whites of upwards of 66%, losing whites by 21%, and that fact alone may well be what's determinative depending on what the electorate looks like tonight. So I think about how divided this country is, not just along racial lines, along gender lines, but also along political lines. We know this is going to be an extremely close race no matter what happens. And what does that tell us about how we'll govern for the next 4 years?
That's right. Whoever wins that 270 tonight is in for a lot of partisanship. To Andrea Mitchell. Andrea, you're covering the Senate and House races tonight, and there's a lot of closely watched contests.
And speaking of partisanship, we're going to be watching to see whether the Democrats, first of all, can retain the Senate, control of the Senate. They have more to defend, 23 out of the 33 seats, but the Republicans have some self-inflicted wounds that they themselves would acknowledge, with Todd Akin and Richard Murdoch in Missouri and Indiana, the candidates who spoke so controversially about rape. We're going to be watching women. 18 of these candidates in both parties in the Senate are women. That is an all-time high. And we're watching the House, of course. The Republicans expected to retain control of the House, but what's going to happen to the Tea Party and to the partisanship in the House?
Andrea Mitchell wrapping up our purely political subtext so far tonight, and it must be said, by this time tomorrow night, this plaza will likely be full of swirling snow from a huge storm that's going to add insult to injury to this region. Already, for millions of voters here in the Northeast, this election day includes such a painful subtext as the suffering from Hurricane Sandy continues for so many people. Ron Allen's been covering that. He's across the river from New York City in hard-hit Hoboken, New Jersey. Ron, good evening.
Good evening to you, Brian. This city hall has been the center for relief operations here, and today they added voting to the long list of things they're trying to accomplish. For voters in New York and New Jersey still battling the aftermath of the storm, there was frustration and confusion and a huge problem caused by email voting. Election day got off to a chaotic start in communities outside New York City that still don't have power, when voters arrived at polling places that were not ready.
It's a disgrace. This whole thing is a disgrace. I've been here 3 times. They finally got machines in. Now the machines are jammed up.
In Manhattan, where the storm's effects still linger, the lines were long. In Queens, tents were set up outside unusable polling places. Shuttle buses carried other voters to alternative sites. Throughout the metro area, some who turned out early even used flashlights, any means possible to have their vote counted.
That's the only frightening part. There's a lot of people that just don't have provisions to come and vote.
To make it easier, registered voters could cast ballots at any polling place. In New Jersey, anyone displaced by the storm could vote by email or fax, an unprecedented move that overwhelmed election offices. Frustrated voters who could not get ballots vented on social media. Voting in New Jersey is a disaster, said one tweet. Late today, the governor made it clear email voting is limited.
If you haven't been displaced from your home because of the storm, get your butt up and go vote at your polling place.
In many storm-battered communities, buildings normally used for voting served many roles. In Hoboken, voters lined up at one side of the high school, while on the other side, storm victims lined up for emergency supplies. And many still plan to vote.
I'm still going to vote. I'm still going to vote. That's not going to change anything.
Late today, because of that huge backlog, the deadline to vote by email was extended to Friday night at 8 p.m. Even before that move, critics were warning of voter fraud, and legal experts say all this will very likely land the state of New Jersey in court. Brian?
All right, Ron Allen across the way in Hoboken tonight. Ron, thanks. And our justice correspondent, Pete Williams, has been watching for all reports of irregularities at the polls today. He reports that so far things have gone fairly well for the most part. He'll be a part of our election night coverage tonight. However, one incident quickly went viral starting this morning. It happened to a voter in Pennsylvania today as he filmed himself pushing the electronic screen, the Obama button. The machine checked off Romney's name instead. He tried it again, same thing, eventually figured out how to touch the screen in such a way that allowed him to choose the candidate of his choice. He reported the problem to poll workers. We're told the machine was recalibrated and returned to service. When our broadcast continues from Democracy Plaza this election night 2012, this other big story we're following, the continuing suffering from Sandy and how that has led to a vital new mission for the U.S. Marines. We're back. This was the scene in the Far Rockaway section of Queens in New York City today. Hundreds of people lined up to get food and water from the National Guard and NYPD. Among the items being handed out, blankets from the New York Marathon that was canceled. In one area particularly hard hit, Staten Island, the problems are piling up. As the old saying goes, when you got a problem, send in the Marines. Well, they did, as NBC's Stephanie Gosk found out there today.
Marines on patrol, but this isn't Helmand Province. It's the storm-ravaged streets of Staten Island.
It was hard to look at. It was hard to watch.
50 Marines in a community that needs the muscle, especially the Merkins.
Heavy. It's a huge job. And we said just, no problem, we can do it.
Lily, a kindergarten teacher, can't talk about her home without crying.
Water was high. Water was like that.
Russian immigrants, they worked for years to save enough money to buy their house. Demolition is the only way to save what's left.
So of course, it's big help. I really appreciate it. We cannot do by ourselves such a work.
This is the kind of work that is needed all along this block, and people are coming by to help out, but they're charging $3,000 to do what these Marines are doing in here for free.
In just an hour, the job was done.
When I walk through these streets, it's like nothing I've ever seen before. These homes were ripped off the foundation, and fires and floods and winds, everything damaged this place so bad.
Based at Camp Lejeune, they were getting ready to deploy again to the Middle East when they got the call to come to Staten Island.
Everybody's really thankful. We're happy to be here.
With the sun going down, the Marines return to their chopper. Fly back to their ship, the USS Wasp. They will be on the ground here again tomorrow.
This debris field behind me is now a 24-hour-a-day operation. The pile, already big, is going to get a lot bigger, Brian.
Stephanie, I'm sitting here thinking you've been shot at while covering the Marines in war zones around the world. Now at least you're in the more hospitable climes of Staten Island, New York, but still with the U.S. Marines. Stephanie Gosk over in Staten Island, thanks. And there's this other storm on the way. As I said, by this time tomorrow night, we could be seeing bands of snow through New York. The problem, of course, is the coastline. There are already mandatory evacuations underway in some Jersey Shore beach communities, the low-lying ones where the dunes, the protection is gone, washed away. Jim Cantori, Weather Channel meteorologist, with us for an update on the movement severity of the storm. Jim, good evening.
Good evening, Brian. Yeah, it's already coming to fruition. You can see it just off the coast here. These high clouds screaming north to where it is going to be yet another cold night tonight in New England in these storm-ravaged areas. This model is going to give us an idea of what the storm is going to do. Possibly by tomorrow morning, no precipitation on the coast yet, but it won't be long after that. But look at what happens during the evening, Brian. We change the rain over to snow, even in New York City, even in the hard-hit Jersey Shore, across Long Island as well. So the wind, the surge, and now the snow to add insult to injury 9 days after Sandy.
Unbelievable. We'll talk to you next right back here tomorrow night. Jim Cantori, thanks. We'll take a break in a moment. What voters are telling us mattered most to them as they left the polls today. Time for an every 4-year staple. Every election day, NBC News and other news organizations conduct those exit polls, asking voters what they were thinking as they left their polling places, what mattered to them most. Well, all night tonight, Tamron Hall is going to be just off ice across the rink with the voice of the voters. Tamron, good evening.
Hey there, Brian. We measured the nation's mood by asking voters in our NBC News exit poll, do you think things in this country today are generally going in the right direction or seriously off on the wrong track? Early results from the exit polls show voters are a bit more negative than positive, but not by much. Take a look. 46% believe the country is going in the right direction, while 52% believe it's going in the wrong direction. Now let's compare these numbers to previous elections. Well, George W. Bush ran for a second term in 2004. We know that. At that time, about half the country believed things were going in the right direction. Now, by 2008, a record 75% of the voters said the nation was seriously off on the wrong track. That, of course, is when we saw the economic meltdown. The Republicans lost the White House. In 2012, the national mood has improved a lot in 4 years, though. It is still a bit more negative than positive. Question, will it be enough to help President Obama keep his job? We'll have to stay tuned.
That's right. What votes will that fact motivate tonight? Tamron, thanks. We'll be checking in with you all night. And we're just moments away from poll closings in several states. We're back with more of our coverage right after this. First big poll closings just minutes away. That includes the state of Virginia. Our special election night coverage begins just after this quick break. We'll be with you all evening long, our entire election team, with the latest results. This is it, beginning in a few moments, so get comfortable. But for now, that's it for us for NBC Nightly News this election night. I'm Brian Williams. Our special coverage again just moments away now.